So even though the Bills haven't made a real Super Bowl run yet, you got to feel a little better about your team these days. Since you live in Boston, you have to listen to Patriot fans forever, right?
Yeah, I moved to Boston in '99, which was the last time they made the playoffs. There was something that was called the Music City Miracle. I don't know if anyone outside of Buffalo ever heard of it, but what happened is they were playing the Titans, and the last play of the game, they did this crazy lateral on a kickoff and ran it back to win the Bills' final playoff game for the next 17 years. They didn't make the playoffs for 17 years. So basically, the whole time I lived in Boston, I was just getting pummeled by, Patriots fans ripping on me. But but
I
that was
remember
fun.
I remember when Bledsoe went up there and they came and they beat the Patriots 31 to nothing. I was like, I grew up a Patriot fan, but I wasn't as gung ho about their big run that they had with, Brady and everything. But I take a lot of grief from my family for that because I grew up there. But so what was it like growing up in Buffalo? Like I think I heard Alejandro say you grew up in a small town outside of Buffalo. Is that true? Or are you from the city?
No, that's totally true. I grew up in a town called Dunkirk, New York, which is about 40 minutes south of Buffalo. Um, it has about 12,000 people. It was a former steel town, but then the industry kind of left nearly the entire country. The steel mill closed down. Really, no business ever came back to take its place. So it's had enough of like a pretty rough number of decades since then. But yeah, there's a few interesting things about it though.
I think I've heard of Dunkirk for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe because they have one famous person from there, you.
Well, um, no, so Dunkirk is kind of funny because it's this small little town. Not a lot there, but like two of the original members of Megadeth came from Dunkirk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wait a minute, is
so
Chris from there?
Chris Poland and Gar
Oh,
Samuelson were from my hometown.
wow. I worked with Chris, and when I was at A&M, Damn the Machine, I went on
Yep,
tour with them for 6 weeks, so I really got to know. I forgot he would, maybe that's why it sounded familiar.
that could
Wow.
be. Yeah, it was really cool because you're growing up in a small town like that, but there are these people maybe, they're what 10, 15 years older than me maybe, but they had done it. They had started Megadeth. It was something to really aspire to. And I also have a friend named Sean Patrick McGraw who he didn't take the metal route, even though he's kind of like my heavy metal hero growing up. He had like long hair and could shred. But he ended up moving to Nashville and playing country. And he ended up he had a short TV show run on CMT, and he opened for a lot of larger acts nationally, like touring the country. And so he did pretty well too. So a bunch of us, like, you know, Western New York hicks with big dreams. At least I had like a pattern to try to follow, or some inspiration.
Yeah, I got to work with the Goo Goo Dolls on a couple of records too, and I know they're from Buffalo, not too far from where you're from, probably. And I think Cannibal Corpse is from there too, right?
Totally,
It's
yeah.
great.
Yeah, like everyone loved the Goo Goo Dolls growing up. You know, yeah, we Buffalo hipsters, if there was such a thing, we got very angry when their ballads started becoming popular, right? Because we liked their earlier songs when they were punk rock, and they called themselves the what were they, the Sex Maggots before they were the Goo Goo Dolls, and so that was interesting to watch. Yeah, Cannibal Corpse was from there. Ani DeFranco,
Oh yeah.
she's
Yeah, she's
from
great.
Buffalo.
Yeah, wow. So did you like start playing at an early age?
Uh, yeah, somewhat early age. It's my parents were both hippies, and so they grew up playing acoustic guitar. Like I just every memory I had went from being really young was my dad playing or my mom playing, and they tried to get me to play at a really early age. Like, hey, Bryn, when you're 6 or 7, why don't you try picking up a guitar? And I didn't want anything to do with it. Like, I wanted to play video games and I just wasn't interested. And it wasn't until I found out about Motley Crue, and like I just thought, you know, that the Satanism and the look and the sweet riffs was like the coolest things, and my mom really didn't like it, and then I was like, okay, that's what I want to do.
Alienation.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I don't. If it was something my parents approved of, like some Peter, Paul, and Mary songs, I really didn't care. But if it was Shout at the Devil, like I was all in.
So did you ask for an electric guitar?
I did, yeah. So I got one when I was 12.
Oh, that's
Um,
good.
yeah, it was a one from Sears, and it had this little amp that was like battery powered. But if I turned it way up, I could kind of get it to distort, and just yeah, that's when I picked it up.
Besides the Crew, were you listening before the Crew even? Were you listening to more classic rock bands, or did you just get into the metal thing?
Yeah, before that, I was completely into like Michael Jackson. I
Wow.
Michael Jackson, and then the different types of hip hop things that would actually make its way out to Dunkirk, New York, which would have been like the Beat Street movie and like the break-in movies. Like I could rap probably the entire Beat Street theme song, which is like 7 minutes long right now if I had to, because I listened to it so many times. So yeah, I would cut out my cardboard and I would like try to make my own graffiti on it and like learn how to do the windmill. Um, that's what I was into, and until Motley Crue, I guess.
And then did you get into like the other 80s metal bands after that? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I got really into uh Ozzy Osbourne's tribute album, the live one with Randy Rhoads,
Oh yeah.
and that kind of really cemented what I wanted to do with guitar at that age, because Randy Rhoads playing was just something I hadn't really heard, and I got really into that. And then uh, in my town, hair metal was kind of a really big thing. Like the cheerleaders would come out and dance to like Master of Puppets or like Van Halen. Like we were very much like um I don't know, a hard rock little small town.
Nothing wrong with that at all.
Oh, another thing I should mention about Dunkirk. So I have so much Dunkirk trivia. It's kind of funny.
I love
Uh,
it.
so that 70s show, if you ever watched that,
Yeah,
Ashton
yeah, yeah.
Kutcher and all them. So the writer of that show, Mark Brazil, was from Dunkirk. And every person on that show was based on people, his neighbors, basically. And they drop a bunch of Dunkirk references in that show, like we're going to the Pines or we're going somewhere else, and those were all places in Dunkirk. And I guess when they did focus testing, calling it the Midwest, calling it Milwaukee, played out better than New York, because when you think of New York, you think of New York City. But the original idea was,
Interesting. That's really interesting because I always thought it was based on a Wisconsin town, you know? Wow. So you said you moved to Boston in 99. Had you already did you play with any bands or do anything in Dunkirk before you moved to Boston? And why did you move to Boston would be the next question.
yeah, totally. I basically, as soon as I started playing guitar, I found some friends to try to play in a band with. Um, and one of the tough things I think about growing up in a small town is the pool is very small to play with. You find maybe the 5 or 6 people that are around your age into the same music, and then you all form like 8 different bands over your high school careers, just like permutations of the same people. And yeah, so I had a band with my friends when I was 13 called Innocent Madness. And we played a bunch of Guns N' Roses covers and basically anything we could find tablature for. Like, there used to be magazines that came out before the internet, before YouTube, where you can learn anything you want online, which is amazing. You would get this monthly magazine called The Guitar for the Practicing Musician, and it would have
Yeah.
tablature in it that was like, this is how you play Looks to Kill by Motley Crue. And I didn't have a good enough ear yet at the time to really figure it out by myself. But if I could get the tablature, I could start figuring it out. And so, like, basically every song we decided to play back then was based on what were in these magazines, which is kind of funny.
It is funny. And moving to Boston, Oh, you know what I wanted to ask you? Did you happen to know Mark Poland, Chris's brother, by any chance?
No, I didn't. Those dudes are a bit older than me.
Yeah, because
I
you know
didn't know him.
Mark played with Chris and Damn the Machine, and I thought maybe yeah, maybe I guess they are a little older than you. You would, well, Chris definitely. Mark's his younger brother, but I'm not sure how old he is. I figured I just asked that.
Yeah,
So
no,
you're in Dunkirk. You play with some bands up there and stuff. Did you go to Boston? Move to Boston to go to school?
no. So I um I went to school at the University of Buffalo. Um, for I didn't really have a great reason to go to that college besides um my mom was always really hard on me about my grades growing up, and she was like, if you don't study, you'll never even get into the University of Buffalo. And I said something like, Mom, I can never study and I'll still get into that school. So basically every big life decision I've ever made was kind of based on being stubborn, I guess. I don't know. So I went there. I lived in Buffalo for 4 years. Played in bands there. There's a cool music scene in Buffalo. There used to be a goth club called the Continental that we played at a lot. And I actually played in an industrial band. Um, we ran an Amiga computer on stage to run all of our samples, and did that. And that not many people were doing that, especially in Buffalo at the time. So that was interesting.
Mohawk
Um,
clubs in Buffalo, right?
Yep,
Yeah, I remember.
that's another great place.
Yeah.
The Mohawk is awesome. There's a place called Nietzsche's. I never really played there. That was a little more jam bandy than what I was into, but there were some good places in Buffalo. Um, but no, so I went to college there. I got my computer science degree because I'm kind of a nerd, and I grew up playing video games, and I thought like I really want to be a professional musician, but if I can't be, like having a backup as a programmer, because I was programming ever since I was a little kid, would be probably a smart thing to do. So I did that while playing in bands, and I eventually moved to Boston to work at a video game company, and that would be in '99.
No, that wasn't. I was going to ask you about your involvement with Rock Band and Guitar Hero. Was this way before that, or is that the company?
No, that was before that. I had interviews at a number of places around the country. But I really liked a company called Irrational Games in Boston. They made a game called System Shock 2 that was one of my favorite games. And when I interviewed there, I just really liked the people. There was something I wasn't ready for. uh Growing up in Dunkirk, I was probably the nerdiest guy that most people knew. Like my mom loved Star Trek and I loved programming, so like I was a real dork. But I wasn't ready for the level of nerdiness that I would see when I went
I
to
knew you were
interview
going to
with these.
say that. I knew you were going to say that. You got out nerded.
I got way out nerded. I like, yeah. So I had interviews out in like San Francisco and like Tulsa and in these random places. And yeah, some of these guys were very unhappy that I hadn't I didn't know enough about like classic anime or comic books or things that were way out of my nerd league. Um and But I didn't get that feeling from the Boston guys. Those guys were nerds like me, but they also um, one guy, he was the art director there. His name is Nate Wells. Um, he was like, "Oh, you're from Buffalo? Have you ever heard of Tugboat Annie?" And it was a band, an indie band from Buffalo that then moved to Boston.
Yeah, yeah.
And and I love Tugboat Annie. And I was like, "Oh, these guys are speaking my language," you know. So I picked Irrational,
That's
and
cool.
yeah.
Were there any other musicians that you met early on working at that specific company, or did that come later?
No, that's exactly how it happened, actually. Um, the lead designer, his name was Ian Vogel, and there's an artist there named Scott Sinclair. And Scott had done all of the artwork for the band Hot Water Music.
Oh
I don't know
yeah,
if so.
yeah.
All of their like iconic album covers were actually painted by Scott, which was interesting. But he was working at Irrational, and so we decided to form a band. So we started a band called the Model Sons in about 2002.
that was next on my list because I saw the Model Sons several times. I moved back and forth from Boston, but I remember that's how I met you. That was the Model Sons, and you guys were really good.
Oh, thank you.
So that was your first band. I tried to find some stuff online, but I couldn't find anything. Did you guys ever release? Do you ever release?
Yeah, we released 2 CDs, but that was the early internet days where, you know, Spotify, things like that weren't
Yeah.
around yet. Um, Most people were just Napstering everything. And we had a website and stuff like that, but that's been long lost to history.
Are you
Um,
thinking about maybe putting those up on Bandcamp sometime?
yeah, I haven't given it a lot of thought. I could talk to Ian and Scott. I'm sure they would be fine with
Just
it.
curious.
Yeah,
Um,
but
now,
one thing that was funny is like I was very intimidated to play in a band in Boston because like I'm a kid from the small town. Like I always pictured you go to cities, that's where the real musicians come from. Even though I had these guys from Megadeth from my hometown, it's still, I don't know, I was intimidated by it. And going out to see shows at the Middle East and cool clubs like the Paradise that were like iconic, where
yeah.
ACDC had played there and stuff, was really cool. And I thought of like getting a Tuesday or Wednesday night at the Middle East upstairs as you've kind of made it in rock. You're playing in a big city, and so Ian, the singer of the Model Sons, he was really into that kind of like Alston Rock City thing that was going on at the time.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, so like bands like Quintain Americana and Rock City Crime Wave, and there's a bunch of them. So we would go out to see them, and eventually got to know those guys, and ended up getting a few shows at the Middle East and stuff. And that was, for me at the time, we got a write up in the Weekly Dig by this dude named Sleaze Grinder. Do you know him?
Oh, he's one of the greatest. Yeah.
Yeah, Sleaze Grinder rules.
Yeah.
We still interact on Facebook a bit, but that really felt like a big thing for me. Like we got written up in a like this independent magazine thing in Boston. Like, and I was just, it was a great feeling at the time.
You're getting noticed by Ken McIntyre, Sleaze Grinder is a good thing, man. He's got an ear, that guy. Really good ear. No, were you in? I thought I heard somewhere that you were involved with Reverse somehow. Did you like play with them for a little while?
Yeah, yep.
Well, I know you
So
play with their drummer now, but
yeah, so Reverse, for anyone out there who doesn't know a lot about the Boston scene, Reverse is kind of like what every musician band would be. Like people love Reverse,
yeah,
or loved Reverse back then. Um, every one of the members was probably the best player of their instrument in the city, and everything, they were able to write these songs that were really intricate and sometimes in different time changes, but it wouldn't sound like it just flowed, and it sounded, and they kind of had everything. And so yeah, like I would go see Reverse all the time, as would many of the musicians in Boston, just to go hear their new music and check out what they're doing. So um Mike Quinn wasn't their original bass player, but he ended up in the band, and he had recorded all of the Model Sons of the 2 CDs we did.
wow, you have a long relationship with Mike because you're still working with him. Wow,
Yeah, yeah. So I've known him over 20 years now.
that's fantastic.
Yeah. So he ended up in the band, and then I heard from do you know Max Heinig?
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
What was that band that he was in a band I really liked?
the High Ceilings.
I love the High Ceilings. Yeah.
Yeah. So Max found out that Reverse was trying out guitar players, and Max didn't feel like he was really up to the task, but the Model Sons had just split up. And so he told Ian Kennedy about me, and Ian contacted me to come over and try out. And it's kind of funny because I didn't, normally I'm really prepared for things like that, but I think I was really busy at work at the time or whatever, and I didn't have time to go and learn their music. And I just always felt like, yeah, their stuff just kind of flows. I'll just go along with it. And it turns out their music is super complex and you can't really just like pick it up as you go by ear. And I think Ian kind of found that to be funny, that I figured I would just show up and just try to rock out along with them and keep up. And evidently a bunch of people tried out, but for some reason they gave me the gig because I don't know, I think maybe thought I was funny or something. But yeah, so I played with them.
Yeah, Ian was a good guy. Rest in peace for sure.
Yeah.
Mike, the drummer, has been on this show. He's a really, well, you're playing with him now. We'll get into that. Um, when I asked Alejandro how you came up with the idea to put Bang Camaro together, he was a really fun guy to talk to. He said it was purely accidental, and he also said that you guys wanted to bring back the 80s guitar solo sound. Can you elaborate on that and tell us the initial idea and plan, that how it launched in your words? Because I'm curious if yours are like his story and yours will match up.
Well, it's kind of funny because our stories won't exactly match up,
I didn't think so.
but it was actually strategized that way. And I'll tell you the real story, which we never used to tell back in the day, because I'll explain. So there's a company called Harmonix, and they were working on a game called Guitar Hero.
Yes.
But Harmonix up to that point hadn't released anything big. They were kind of like the small stepchild of video game developers in Boston. And so they had this sweet game called Guitar Hero they were working on, and they what was it? They put out like a competition to try to do some PR that was basically like, get your song in a video game. And my friend Scott, the guy who was in the Model Sons, had gone over to Harmonix, so he was working on Guitar Hero, and he contacted me and was like, dude, all of these terrible bands are like in this competition, and we don't really want any of them. It was like, they're all too laid back and they're like indie rockers. He was like, could you record something that rocked that we can get into this game? And I was like, yeah, I can do, that'd be awesome. I could totally try to do that. And so Alex and I had already been working together, or we're throwing ideas around. He had left the Good North, I had left the Model Sons. I was playing in Reverse, but they weren't that active. So we were writing music together. And so I told Alex about this. I was like, there's this thing coming out called Guitar Hero. It's probably going to go nowhere. I don't think anyone's going to buy it. You have to buy this like stupid plastic guitar. Like, it's like whatever. But like, we can get a song in there possibly. And we had already been goofing around, just like, you know, we grew up as like young metal kids, so we would always end up like playing solos at the end of the night or whatever. And he was in, and so we recorded a song called Bang Camaro. I'm not a lyricist. I didn't really know what to do, but I thought it'd be pretty funny if there's I don't remember exactly how organically it came out, that it was just going to be us singing Bang in Camaro. But then we got a bunch of friends and we all went over to Mike Quinn's studio. And so there were a bunch of people that sang lead around in other bands. Like you probably know Jason Dunn. He was one of them.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember who
The
else
Luxury, right? The Luxury.
He was in The Luxury and the Helgens. And Rod came, Richie Haas. And we all got around the mic, and I was just like, all right, we're going to yell bang and try to make it sound like Def Leppard. And then we're going to sing Camaro in harmony. And so Alex, a very, you know, he picked up on it right away. He was like, oh, like the Expedia.com commercial? I was like, yes, just like that. So we did it. And actually, Jason Dunn had this really, I think he must have spent a lot of time listening to Def Leppard, because he was like, I think they whisper. I think the trick is that they whisper to make it sound that big. So we did our bang yells, but then we did these bang whisper tracks where we just go like, bang. And when we listened to it back, it was like the biggest thing we had ever heard. And we were just, we were kind of blown away by it. And so that was super fun. And then we submitted that track. We had just recorded like electronic drums. We didn't have a drummer. And we sent that to Harmonix, and they didn't pick us.
Really?
No. They ended up picking a band called Graveyard Barbecue. And I was kind of bummed because I was actually super excited about this song. But so what we did instead, what every band did at the time, is we put it up on MySpace. And Alex's friend made this graphic design of a Camaro that was just like the coolest looking thing, and it had pentagrams on it, and it just said Bang Camaro with like, I think the A had like the anarchy sign and stuff like that. And so the graphic design looked cool, and for some reason that song really took off on MySpace. Like at the time, if you're in a band, you'd put your songs up there and you'd get like 82 plays, and it'd be cool, like all your friends heard it. And all of a sudden we started getting like 3,000 plays a day. And
Wow.
we weren't a band yet. We just had done this one song. We didn't have our minds wrapped around what the concept was, but I did see that there's always that like 20-year nostalgia that goes on. So like, right now you're starting to hear kids make songs that sound like new metal or are influenced by new metal, which is unfortunate.
Sad.
Yeah. But at the time, this was 2005. And so the 20-year nostalgia was 1985 coming in. And I was starting to see people use like winger songs as theme songs of sitcoms, and their darkness was starting to come out. And I was just like, oh, we're on to something. Like, we should push this. And so we spent a little time trying to figure out what we were going to do. We were throwing around all these crazy ideas.
Is this you and Alex basically?
Yep, just me and Alex.
Yeah, like he had given me the exact impression of what you said, that it all happened organically, and it did. Well, so you got these group of guys together, and when did you decide, you know what, let's revisit the group of guys rather than just try and find a singer?
Well, I don't think after that first Bang Camaro recording, I don't think we ever decided to just get a singer. I think at that point we're like, if we do this, this is how we're doing it.
Wow. Ballsy.
But, naive maybe would be a better term.
Well, I'm only thinking in the way other people would react if you show up at a club. And I said this to Alex too, is you show up at a club and say you want 10 mics, the sound man is usually not very happy. I'm sure you ran into some of that.
Oh, dude. Yeah. It was so I'll hit on that in a minute, because we were not at the point of the story yet where we're touring, but that did come up a lot. But yeah, so what we did is I'm sure Alex covered all of this, but we basically talked to all of our friends who were lead singers in other bands, and amazingly, a bunch of them wanted to do it. We thought that people were gonna, say we were crazy, and some did. I remember Heath. Do you remember the band The Information?
I do.
They were
they had a big buzz going for a little while. I was here when that happened. 2005, I'd say it was around that time.
Yep, right. So right when we were forming this band. And so Heath, the bass player in that band, was like, are you two out of your minds? Like, you're basically going to ruin your career and your future music careers by doing something this dumb.
I love how you just threw him under the bus like that. That was awesome.
Well, no, I mean, I didn't disagree with him. Like, none of us really knew what this was going to turn into, if anything. And I was kind of like, yeah, you're probably right, but it's kind of funny. I don't know.
The word novelty has gotten used a lot. And you know what? There's really nothing wrong with that. People always say, well, it's a novelty act. And I'm like, so what? There's been plenty of novelty acts over the years. What's wrong with having another one?
Yeah, I mean, what is rock and roll if not a novelty? I mean, the Who, did they really have to smash all their instruments after every gig, or was that a novelty? Of course it was a novelty. Was Jimi Hendrix setting his guitar on fire because that's what he musically needed to do at the time. Like you could argue that, but I would say, you know,
You could also say that when I moved to LA, the first time I moved there in the end of 83, 84, when you walk down Sunset Boulevard and see like every other block, there's a group of guys that looks exactly the same. It's kind of a novelty too, but no one ever referred to heavy metal as one big novelty, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So if we're going to do hair metal, which is like you were saying, it's basically a novelty. Like even though the players were amazing, they also had the huge hair and the spandex and everything else. Like you know better than I do. You were out in LA at that time. Why not go a little more over the top? But that honestly, for me anyway, it wasn't as much about the novelty as kind of the ability to get that sound that I always looked up to growing up.
Yeah,
Like
you got it.
I used to sit around in my 4-person band and be like, how do we sound like Def Leppard? Or how do we sound like Skid Row? Or how do we get these vocal harmonies like Stryper had? Like their vocal harmonies were amazing, but like I couldn't do them. But I loved the sound. And now having 6, 7, 8 lead singers hanging around offering to their talent to these songs, all of a sudden we had the ability to do that. And I was really excited about that.
You know what I really love about it is when you go back and believe me, I've been watching a lot of Bang Camaro videos the last couple of weeks, even before that, because I had to get ready for Alex too. The guys are so into it. And I know a few of those guys, and it's like they're so into it. And the fact that you could get all those people to be that into it, and it's still continuing with new people. Here's what I want to ask you. This is where I want to go now. Um, did you go on the road with the band before you put the first album out, or did you wait until after the first album?
We waited until after the first
Okay,
album.
good. So what was your plan when it came to making that record? When I was talking to Alejandro, of course I had this brain lapse happen when I was talking to him, and I knew Push Push Lady Lightning was an older song, but I asked him, "Oh, did you guys just do that just for the TV show?" Which we'll get into later. I kind of slipped up, and when I listened to the interview, I was like, "Those guys probably think I'm an idiot." But I knew that was one of the early songs. That was like your first big hit. Did you have that, and did you have all the songs together, and what was your plan to make that record?
Well, the, we didn't, as far as I remember, and it's been quite a while, like 18 years ago. Um, we didn't have a huge plan besides we thought that we would record the album and then we were going to release it ourselves on MySpace, basically a new single every week. And so we would stay in the public eye and keep releasing new stuff. And at that time it was a really tough time for the music business, as I'm
Oh
sure
yeah.
you know. um Music wasn't selling at all.
Nope.
Streaming, as bad as streaming is right now, at least makes you some money. At that time you had Napster and BitTorrent, which basically meant you made no money. um but what we did find from putting our first song, Bang Camaro, up on MySpace is people would buy our merch. So we were selling t-shirts just out of our house. Like we would buy 100 t-shirts locally made in Boston, and then had different graphic design. Our bass player by that point, his name's Dave Riley. He goes by Dawes because there was a band called The Good North that he played in with Alex, and their bass player's name was Mike Morrissey. So he was obviously Moz. So then they became like Moz and Dawes and Laws and whatever else. So Dawes is a great artist. So he started making graphic designs for all of our t-shirts. And so people were really into our song, and then they could buy these t-shirts online, and they were selling surprisingly well, like way better than any t-shirts of any of my bands up to that point had
It's a
ever
catchy
sold.
phrase, it's a catchy phrase. Bang
It
Camaro.
Yeah, and also the early 2000s, mid 2000s were all about irony, right? It was like everyone wore a trucker hat and it was ironic. Everyone drank PBR, and that's not because it was good, but it was ironic to like your uncle's beer. It was like
Yeah.
that was the big thing at the time. And I think this all played into that. Like, uh Bang Camaro, it's so over the top, it's got pentagrams, but we ironically like shout at the devil. It
Yeah.
was just part of the zeitgeist, I think. But it touched a note, and I would box up 10, 20 t-shirts a week, take them to the local Union Square post office in Somerville, send them out to people, and we were making a few $1,000s a month on t-shirt sales.
Wow. It's
And
amazing.
yeah, and so basically our thought was like, we don't need a record label because record labels they don't know what they're doing right now. They're trying to figure it out, but we know that we can sell t-shirts. So we just put up some songs every, stagger the songs so people can keep talking about it. And Dawes made new artwork for every song, and and then yeah, that was our that was our goal at that point.
I think I
Um,
remember Alex also saying that the first show you guys ever played was the Paradise.
well, the first actual show we ever played, actual in quotes, was in Richie Haas's basement. So, so Richie Haas would throw these ragers in Alston in his tiny little basement, but he was somehow like he would get them sponsored by PBR, and like he was just really good at talking to people. So it became a thing, and Richie was one of our singers and wanted to know if we wanted to play that show. And I was personally worried about it because like we had this big band in a small basement, and what are people going to think? I'm kind of a shy, nervous guy to begin with, so I didn't know how it would turn out. And it was amazing. It was over the top. The people showed up and they were like, pumping their fists to our lyrics, and it was just this reaction that was very obvious that like things were happening. People in Boston cared.
So I kind of went out of place there. Was this before or after the record?
This was probably while we started releasing things on MySpace. I can't remember. The
Oh
timeline's
yeah,
kind
right.
of
Because you did
confusing to me.
singles, right? You guys were way ahead of the game there because now everyone's boom, single, 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 and that was a smart move. Um, as far as the Dave is like the third wheel, Dave Riley with you guys. He's been there right from the beginning, right?
Pretty much. So Alex and I started out with that song Bang Camaro, and then we were trying to figure out what bass player would be dumb enough to go along with our dumb idea. So we were throwing, and it's funny too because at the time hair metal was a thing you didn't talk about. Like we were in a bunch of indie rock bands, and it didn't really come up that like I could talk very in depth about the members in Slaughter, right? Like it just you don't talk about that. It's embarrassing. But Alex and I eventually figured out that we both spoke that language, but we didn't know anyone else who did. And so we were throwing um, names around. One was Michelle Paulus, because I'd heard her talking about Cinderella before. So I was like, I think she likes hair metal. Maybe she'd play. We're like, okay, we could ask Michelle. Who else do we know? And then I was like, and then I don't know who came up with it. We're like, well, what about Dawes? And Alex knew him far better than I did. I didn't know him very well at that point. And Alex talked to him, and turned out Dawes was a closet hair metal fan. He was like, oh yeah. I was like, oh, and then just started ripping out all these like different Metallica bass lines, and we're like, all right, we got our guy. And so that was very early on, very
I could
first.
I could totally relate to what you're saying about being in almost not wanting to talk about it. I worked with Poison and Striper, and for years I didn't even want to talk about it. It's like you're like, well, I don't know, people don't want to hear about that. I'm happy that things have gone full circle, believe me, because I think those bands deserve as much credit as any band from any era. They sold a lot of records. I mean, you know.
They
So
were super talented too, and it's just unfortunate that the look got ahead of the music. And then I think it's even more unfortunate that, well, I guess kind of what happens with any genre of music is like, it got really corporatized towards the end, and you ended up with bands like Firehouse and Trickster.
Yeah, yeah.
And, what began as like this rebellious, like, we're the youth gone wild, turned into like Baby Don't Treat Me Bad. It was like basically boy bands with a very polished thing. And it was time for grunge to blow that up.
Regurgitated. It was a regurgitation. I know exactly what you're saying because the amount of bands that would come to us at labels at that time that wanted to reproduce what Poison or Rat or LA Guns or those bands were doing was a huge amount of bands.
I'm
Huge.
sure.
Um, so you made that record with Mike Quinn, who you're still making records with, who you've been friends with for a long time. So he gets it.
He he does, but he's not as big of a hair metal guy as we are. There's there's some times where like Alex and I would really be pushing things like what we need is more gated reverb on that snare. And for musicians out there, like gated reverb is what the 80s bands used to make every snare hit sound like a cannon. And it really dates it. Like you could tell, like, yeah, this album was made in 1987 because that snare is ridiculous. And so we'd start pushing for more stuff like that. And he'd be like, come on, guys, you're ruining everything. And he would pull us back. So good for Mike Quinn. But
He kept you guys in line. That's a good engineer right
he
there.
did, yeah, yeah. He did great.
So what changed from when you did the first record to like when it came time to do another record? Was it just because there was had you been on TV at that point?
So the first record came out. We did all that MySpace stuff. Then we got Push Push Lady Lightning into the video game Rock Band, which was made by Harmonix. So it was the continuation of Guitar Hero, but they had sold Guitar Hero to Activision. So now they didn't sell Guitar Hero to Activision, but another company kind of took it and sold it to Activision. So Harmonix created Rock Band. Um, so we were able to get Push Push Lady Lightning into the first Rock Band, and that that really kind of took things to another level where you know basically nationally and internationally people started knowing who our band was.
People that were into the games.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So
was that your audience primarily?
well, it's interesting. It kind of matters where we were in the country. So now it I'll just sorry I'm talking so long about these things.
No, it's okay. I'm all over the place sometimes, so you're helping me keep it going. Because you're going to talk about touring now, I think, right? Yeah, good.
I'm going to do like a 10-second segue into touring. So we ended up with a local Boston manager, and he put us in touch with a company that handles touring, a touring agency. And for these are things I had never dealt with before because I had only played in bands like the Model Sons, where you play locally, or if you can book your own show, that's great, but it's a lot of work, and you might play a show in Buffalo and a show in like Worcester and then come
It's
home.
difficult to book tours. I know, believe me,
Yeah,
it's difficult.
but when you end up with a touring management company, they do that for you,
Yeah.
and they have a lot of power. They can do things like, yeah, you can get Van Halen, who I think was on the same roster. Like
Who
you can
was your
get,
man? Who was your manager and who was the agent?
his name was Seth. Oh, this was so long ago. I should remember this, but it was a big agency. It might come. I'll tell you if I can remember.
Okay.
It might hit me in a few minutes. I can't remember right now. Um,
It's
but
okay. I just was, just
I
for
mean,
reference.
yeah, you would have known them. They had big names. They had the Van Halens and a lot of stuff. But what I learned how they can operate is they'll be like, yeah, we'll book Van Halen into this area, but you also have to take Bang Camaro at this 1,000
Yeah.
seat theater. So they've got negotiation power that they can use to start booking us into places, and which
That's
was,
a good thing. That's a good thing.
yeah, and we weren't a known entity, so we kind of needed that. And one thing that people who may be playing in bands and working their ways up right now should know is like getting a touring management agency is really important. Sometimes the most important thing you can have. And it's really hard
I
to keep
agree.
them too. There's a part of the industry you never hear about coming up. But then when you find out and people are like, oh my God, you're working with them? That's amazing. Then you find out like the importance of that. So anyway, we ended up with our agency, and we started getting booked on like 3-month tours across the country.
And what was it? Tell us briefly what it was like with the band situation with all the microphones and going into a club. Were they prepared at all for this? Did they have a ride? You must have had a rider, right?
Yeah, so another thing you don't learn about when you're playing local shows in your area, you need things like stage plots,
Yes.
which basically is like a graph of like where you need the microphones, where your amps are, what microphones are needed on every amp.
I can
All of
imagine what yours look like. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
So we had this weird thing where like, we had the musicians in the front, and then we had this back line of singers. Um, and so our stage plot was like, and like 6 microphones across the back. And I think the local sound people at each place we'd play would see that and they'd be like, what the hell is this crap? They don't need this. So they would totally not pay attention to our stage plot. Then we'd show up with all these singers and they would get mad. They'd be like, you actually want this? And it's problematic feedback with all those microphones. It's just a real problem
Yeah,
for them.
I can
And
imagine.
we got like, some people would refuse to do it, some people would just get really angry but do it, but we made their job a lot worse. So we learned very quickly we had to have um our own sound guy go with us. So we got Joel Simkis. You probably know him.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Good guy. Yeah.
Yeah, so Joel did mostly all of our tours with us until eventually we used Dan Siders. I don't know if you know him.
The name sounds familiar. Yeah.
uh he did house sound at the Paradise for a while. He did a final few tours with us when Joel couldn't do it anymore. But yeah, so after that we learned we had to always bring our own sound guy.
Which is a good thing.
It's a great thing, except look, we were let's see, we traveled with 6 singers, we had 4 musicians, and then we had our sound guys. So that's 11
11.
people in a 15-passenger van
Oh.
for 3 months at a time.
Oh. Who doesn't talk to each other anymore?
You know, interesting. A lot of like most of us stayed really good friends, but
Were
it
those
got
were the I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but were a lot of those 6 singers, were they from the original batch?
yep, yeah, and we weren't making a ton of money. Like one thing people not in the industry always say is like, if recorded music doesn't sell as well, just make your money touring. And what they don't
A lot of
understand
people.
is
Yeah.
they don't understand back in the day of the big music business is you would get touring support. Touring would lose money. You'd go out on the road because you're basically your own advertisement for your CD or your album. And so the ability for a small band like ours to just make money on tour was impossible.
Yeah.
We would we would get okay guarantees. What guarantees are is like if you go to a club, it's the minimum they'll pay you. I'm not explaining to you. I'm just kind of explaining to people
Yeah.
that I know you know. And so we would get guarantees, but they wouldn't cover our hotel room costs. And it's not like we had a hotel room per guy. We would sneak 2 people in the front of the hotel and we'd be like, we need 2 rooms, please. And they would give us 2 rooms. And then we would like have hand signals to tell the van where to go park. And then all 11 of us would just like end up in 2 hotel rooms every night. We all had our own sleeping bags, just sleeping on the floor.
I would not want to be the tour manager for that. You probably were your own tour manager, actually.
Well, honestly, we did some, and Joel actually handled a lot of it. He would call, you know, to the club early to make sure they had everything we needed, which wasn't much because we were young. So it's like, what do you need? I don't know, 3 cases of beer. um, and so Joel would handle a lot of that, but it was grueling. There was very little personal time. I uh, I had a difficult time touring because I'm I'm kind of shy and an only child, and I kind of just like to do my own thing. And when I'm not getting stuff done, whether it's like working on some coding I'm working on, or practicing something, or doing something where I feel like I'm learning, it's hard for me. And so just being surrounded all the time by people for 3 months straight, actually,
Oof.
it was really hard. And that was eye-opening for me because my dream up to that point in life was to get into a band to go touring. Then I went touring, and it was really difficult.
Yeah, most people don't know that. They have that dream, but then when they get out there and having two rooms for 11 people, that is not fun. I don't want to gloss over this because I really want to talk about the new record, but tell me a little bit about the transition to Bang Camaro 2 and how much changed. Did anything change? I mean, with the personnel and the approach and all that.
Uh, well, not a lot changed besides fatigue, really. Um, the first album came out and the first tours went on, and everyone was really psyched. And it was, it's fun, like driving around the country with all of your best friends and getting to play shows and meet people, and um, you know, all these interesting things that happened. We could, yeah, little things that I remember now fondly. It would be like we would go to a Taco Bell because we're all hungry and we're in the middle of nowhere in Kansas or somewhere driving, and the kid in the microphone would be like, "Are you Bang Camaro?" Because like what other
Oh, excuse me.
bunch of like 11-year-old dirty rock guys would be like driving around the country.
It's great getting recognized, though, right?
It was just funny, but those
Yeah.
are those are good memories. But and so we got back, and we had worked on a number of new songs, and uh what's the term, I'm sure you know the term, the second album curse,
Sophomore jinx.
the sophomore jinx, that's what it is.
Was I right?
I think you're right. um and what happens is before you go on your first tour, you get a long time to think about your first album, and you generally come up with really good stuff. And the sophomore jinx comes around because you're tired. You've just been driving around the country for months. You haven't had time in the practice space to work on new material for that long. So you're kind of rushed. So, but we had some songs that I think were pretty good that we had put together, and we went and recorded again with Mike Quinn and a guy named Ducky Carlisle, you probably know.
Just passed away, unfortunately.
Yeah, Ducky just passed away, well, maybe a week or two ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's he was a good guy. I didn't know him all that well, but we worked with him a little bit. He did our drum sounds and stuff for that album. And yeah, so that all came together. And so I had an idea for that album, which was, again, still not believing that albums or CDs really sold very well. What I wanted to do is make a reason for people to actually want to buy it. So I thought of coming up with a small limited edition box set, which was like it would come in this like cool looking box that the Dawes designed, and it would have stuff in it. So I don't remember whose idea. Probably Alex had some ideas. Everyone had some ideas. But so we put a patch in it that it was like this cool looking Bang Camaro patch, and there was like a pin, and like we all signed it, and we did a short run of that. And I kind of thought that would be it, because people would pay. We had 1,000 fans that would pay pretty good money for like a collector's edition style thing like this, and
Yeah.
we could still sell our t-shirts as we had done. um and and that's what we would do. That's what Bang Camaro 2 would be. But our manager at the time he was kind of, I would say, old school, but he was trying to stick to more the old school playbook. So he thought it was very important to actually press CDs. And he had us talking to a bunch of major labels who were interested in us because they were like, who is this weird band that's making all this money off their own merch when we're not making any money? Like, what are they doing? So
They wanted a piece of the pie.
yeah. And it was interesting because, we talked to a number of major labels and a number of smaller like labels like Razor and Tie that were distributed by
Yeah.
major labels,
Uh-huh.
Roadrunner, stuff like that. And man, they were not offering anything. They they were giving offers that if we were all 19 might have sounded really good, but I remember talking to one representative and being like, look, what you're offering us up front is as much as we make in 3 months selling merch ourselves. Like, why would we ever do that? And so we decided to not go with a major label and keep things on our own label, which we had called Black Sword Records, and that's what we released our first one on. And in hindsight, I don't know if that. I think financially it was the right idea, but there's a number of things that we couldn't do as well as major labels could. Like, if a major label
Promotion.
if
Yeah.
a major label got behind us, maybe in every record store across the country there would have been a Bang Camaro poster.
Yeah.
They have the ability to push things that we couldn't. We did hire PR companies on our own, and that's how we ended up we got a lot of good press. We were on the cover of Billboard magazine.
Yeah.
We were in Rolling Stone. We had
Television,
yeah, we played on Kimmel, we played on Conan O'Brien. And that was all stuff that we did as our own record label. And but that came at a price, and that price was we were sending way more money out the door than we were keeping for ourselves. In fact, we were keeping basically nothing for ourselves. Our books were terrifying to look at. We were grossing a ton of money. There was one year where we pulled in over $1 million one year.
Wow, really?
And we sent it almost all right back out the door because of paying for press people, paying our manager. When you have managers, they tend to take off the gross, not the net. So that means if your manager gets paid 20% off the gross, that means all the money you bring in, which for us was a considerable amount of money, he takes the 20% off of that.
You're making me feel bad now because I, managed bands and, I took 20% from some of the bands.
I think we actually negotiated him down to 17.5 or something. But, the difficulty was our band. And our overhead was so high because we'd want to pay people some amount of money every day on tour. We were paying a sound guy every day for his services. We were having a van to pay off. We were paying everything ourselves.
Yeah.
That our net and our gross were widely different. And so when your manager is taking, I'll just break it down like this. So say you're going to a club and you're going to get paid $1,000 to play there, but gas prices were really high at the time, and we had 2 hotel rooms, and we paid all of our guys, and we're also paying promotion companies, and we're paying our booking agency who booked us to play
10%.
into that club. 10%, right? So you go from $1,000 that day gross to net $150, but already 17% is $170 that just went to your managers. So you ended up losing money that day, and you lose money for 3 months straight. And if we were a band of 3 people, it would have been a different story.
You got to really love the rock and roll, kids.
Yeah. If anyone listens to this, it's like something you should really look into and learn about before you do it, or have a manager you really trust, or don't start a band with 11 people on the road, because It's
I'm gonna have to hit a fast forward button here and just go right to what made you guys come back and start playing again. And did you and Alex talk about this and realize you missed it? And because it was several years you didn't do it, and now you're doing it again. What made you come back?
well, what I mean, the main thing that made us come back is we were contacted by HBO to place one of our songs, Push Push Lady Lightning, in a show called Peacemaker, which we didn't know anything about, but they said they thought John Cena would be in it, and it was a superhero TV show, which sounds cool. Um, and they sent us this little treatment that was how they were going to use our song in an episode. And we we didn't even know if this was like legit. It it kind of just
You never
came,
do with licensing.
yeah, it just came to our emails, and we didn't really even know what to think of it. And like Alex has been playing in bands this whole time. I hadn't picked up my guitar in 10 years. I after Bang,
Really?
yeah, I stopped
Wow.
playing. After Bang Camaro, I was kind of like, okay, like I don't know if I'll ever be in a band to this level again. And even if I do, I had a very hard time with it. So I'm going to move on to do other things. So I just stopped playing. And so I had no idea what a going rate for a sync license on HBO would be. And we know we had sold our publishing to a company that didn't exist anymore. So we had to figure out how that worked. So we had to track down who owned our publishing now and just a
Ooh,
bunch of paperwork
gets
like that.
complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we finally figured that out. And it actually worked out really well because we had our publishing company negotiate for us and they know what they're doing. So they actually negotiated a pretty good deal. And then the company, another licensing company came back and they said, we're interested in you doing the trailer for this Peacemaker TV show. And
I watched the trailer. It's good, real good.
yeah, yeah. Um, and the and so the publisher negotiated that, but they came back with like, well, we're looking at multiple bands. We don't know if you'll be used, whatever. And so it wasn't one day I woke up and my email and my Facebook, like my social media was just kind of like blowing up and I had no idea what was going on. And I clicked on it and everyone was linking to this Peacemaker trailer. And they were like, holy fuck, Bryn, like what's going on here? And I was like, I don't know. So I watched the trailer and I was like, I was blown away. Like the first part of it was like Motley Crue, and I was like, oh, I guess they used Motley Crue. And then the second half was Bang Camaro, and it just fit really well.
Really good, really good.
And I was super excited about it. Like it was really nice. It was like this band, they hadn't been a band in over 10 years, and it was validating. It was like I always thought
So
that like our
that's so this was singularly the thing that made you say, let's do this, let's put this back together again.
pretty much, although it didn't even it wasn't even that thought out. Like Alex Dawes and I hadn't even hung out in the same room together in 8 years or so. But we're like, hey, let's get together and watch the trailer. Let's hang out. And so yeah, I was super excited about that trailer, and it was really fun. And we had been throwing this idea around for naming a song "Too Fast to Fall in Love," which is kind of a play on two classic Motley Crue songs.
Yeah,
So it was always this
exactly.
kind of like thing we would joke about in the van or whatever for the past 15 years. And the night before I went over to Alex's house to hang out, like I kind of just like was thinking like what would that song sound like? And I kind of just wrote it in my head in the shower. Um, so the next day we were hanging out and I was like, hey, I've got this idea. I like we always talk about Too Fast to Fall in Love. Like, what do you guys think of this? And I could barely play it because I hadn't played guitar in 10 years. Like my fingers were super weak, but they could figure out what I was talking about. And it just kind of went from there. We all just wrote a few songs and um
There's some good
yeah,
ones too. I've listened to the record. The Gatherer, I like. One Way, I really like those songs. We Know, You Know. It came out and just came out in September, and I want to talk about some of these other people. Mike Peel's playing on it now, so it's almost like you're getting all the reverse guys involved, the ones that are still here. Ian's probably giving it a thumbs up. Um, and then you had no trouble getting together an all-star band. I mean, I was looking at the list, and you've even got women now in your doing the vocals, which is Michelle Paulus. You mentioned her before. You had to finally get her in the band, and you did. And Brooke House, he plays with Alex and Worship Her, and it's a really great lineup of people. Are you gonna do a live show?
I mean, I don't plan on it. Um, I you know this recording took a long time to make. It altogether, I think from when we started writing the music to when we released the music, it was about 2 years. Um, from when the Peacemaker
2 years. Wow.
yeah. So to be completely honest, I kind of backed out towards the end. I um two of the final two songs on the album, which came out great, I didn't record on them.
Oh,
Alex and Dawes put that together, and I think they came out really well. But I just I I felt like even though we weren't constantly working on this, it was just taking a lot of my mental space. Like I'm always thinking about like, how can we promote it this way? What idea can we come up with for Bang Camaro to do that? And I was kind of, I wasn't, I felt like I should be putting my time into other things that I think were a little
I get it.
more important for me at the time. So I don't think that there's any plans to bring that live. If there are, it most likely won't include me. I don't know what Alex and Dawes have talked about with that. Um, but not to my knowledge.
That's cool. I got to ask you one other thing before you go. I asked Alec who his favorite guitar player was, and he said it was Steev Clark. Because you guys, man, I think you guys are great. We're great together. If it doesn't happen again, you complement each other's guitar play. You're both great lead players, and I love the way you guys play together. He told me Steev Clark was his favorite guitar player from Def Leppard, the late Steev Clark. And I have a feeling you're going to pick an 80s guitar player or over one of the earlier guys. Am I right about that? I mean,
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I would say that my favorite guitar player is probably Randy Rhoads, but
okay.
but there's also like a yeah, I got really into Nuno Bettencourt when I was
Oh,
like 15.
he's getting better and better, it seems. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable how good he is.
Yeah, that dude's insane. But a lot of the things that I tried to pick up from playing, like the way Alex plays, he's got this really cool like legato behind the beat kind of playing, where I'm more kind of like straight on the beat, alternate picking, like really like more percussive, and I always kind of like that. You can really tell when Alex is playing versus when I'm playing, and I always liked the way Alex played way better than how I play. But but thank you for saying that. Like I do think that we really sound very different.
So Randy Rhoads and Steev Clark. That's a pretty good combo. I'll take that. Hey, thanks a lot, man. And I'm sure the Bills are going to be on soon. So are they playing today?
They're playing the Sunday night game tonight,
Oh,
actually.
good. You
But
got plenty of time to get ready.
yeah, I'll get my Zubas on in a little while.
Thank you so much, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
All right.
Later.